How often do you think about the story of your life? The narrative that explains why you are the way you are. Now, for many of us, that story begins in the past. It might be rooted in a difficult childhood, or maybe it was shaped by a painful rejection. It could even be defined by a single moment of failure that you believe set your entire life on a specific course. And we hold on to these stories. We use them to make sense of our struggles, our fears, and our limitations. Now, imagine someone telling you that this entire story, the very foundation of your identity, is a fiction. A convenient and carefully constructed fiction that you wrote yourself, and that you have the power to stop telling it at any moment. Today, we are diving deep into a book that makes this exact claim. It's a book that has quietly ignited a global movement, and it challenges the very core of Western psychological thought. This book is The Courage to be Disliked by Ichiro Kishimi and Fumitake Koga. This work is not just a book, but rather a direct challenge to the prisons we build for ourselves. Presented as a sharp dialogue between a cynical young man and a philosopher, the book unpacks the revolutionary ideas of the psychologist Alfred Adler, and it begins with a claim so radical, it can feel like a personal attack. The philosopher states, quite bluntly, that psychological trauma does not exist. So let's be absolutely clear about this stunning proposition. This idea does not deny that terrible, painful, and unjust things happen to people, and it does not dismiss suffering. Instead, it proposes a radical new relationship to those events. It argues that no experience, in and of itself, is a cause of our success or our failure. Nothing in your past has the power to determine your present. The book argues that we are not pushed from behind by the cause and effect chain of our history. Instead, we are pulled forward by the goals we are setting for ourselves, right here, in this very moment. It suggests that our current unhappiness, or our anxieties, or our feelings of inadequacy are not permanent scars from past wounds. In fact, they are tools that we are subconsciously choosing to use today, and we choose them to achieve a specific, hidden purpose. This concept is the master key to unlocking the entire philosophy of this book. It is a difficult idea to accept, and it can feel dismissive, it can even feel like an accusation, but the authors insist that it is the exact opposite. It is not an accusation, but a declaration of profound freedom. It means that your life is not a movie where the beginning dictates the end. It is a blank page, and you are holding the pen, right now. So if you have ever felt trapped by your history, or chained to an old version of yourself, or stuck in a pattern you can't escape, then this deep dive will offer a powerful and perhaps life-changing path forward. We are about to dismantle the story you've been telling yourself and discover who you can be without it. In our introduction, we were left with a deeply unsettling idea, the idea that trauma, as we understand it, does not exist, and that our past does not determine our present. This claim likely sparks immediate resistance, and it feels invalidating. It seems to fly in the face of lived experience. So, if the very real pain from our past is not the direct cause of our struggles today, then what is? Our entire understanding of ourselves seems to crumble under this question. To rebuild it, we must journey from the familiar world of cause and effect and into the strange and powerful new territory of purpose. And this is the shift from etiology to teleology, and it is the absolute foundation of a life of freedom. To truly grasp the revolutionary nature of Adlerian psychology, we must first understand the prison it seeks to liberate us from. That prison is called etiology. Etiology is the study of causation, or the simple, intuitive logic of this caused that. This is the default setting for most of modern thought. A glass falls because it was pushed, and a plant grows because it was watered. A person is unhappy because of something that happened to them in their past. This worldview was cemented in psychology by Sigmund Freud. In the Freudian model, a person is like a complex machine, and a traumatic event in the past is like a blow from a hammer that breaks a crucial gear. From that moment on, the machine malfunctions, and it is forever damaged. The present is nothing more than the echo of that past impact, and so your life becomes a detective story, where the goal is to hunt for the clues in your childhood, find the culprit, and name the original wound, all to understand how it made you who you are today. We cling to this ideological view for very human reasons. First, it offers a simple and compelling narrative, it is clean, and it provides a reason, but more importantly, ideology offers a strange and seductive kind of comfort. It is the comfort of helplessness. For instance, if your unhappiness is caused by something your parents did 20 years ago, then your current state is not your fault. You are, in a sense, innocent. You are a victim of your circumstances. And this worldview removes the heavy burden of responsibility from your shoulders. It is a powerful justification for staying exactly where you are. After all, how can you be expected to change the present when it was caused by a past that is already set in stone? This way of thinking has saturated American culture so deeply that we rarely even notice it. And it is embedded in our everyday language. Think about how we talk about our feelings. We say, "My boss made me so angry." This sentence structure positions you as the passive object. The boss is the active subject who did something to you, and anger is presented as the necessary effect of their action. Or we say, "My heavy workload is making me stressed." Again, the workload is the cause, and your stress is the inevitable result. You are not an agent in this equation. You are simply the place where the reaction happens. And pop psychology is built on this very foundation. We hear stories of people having commitment issues because their parents divorced, or having low self-esteem because they were bullied in school. The past is presented as a life sentence. Adlerian psychology asks us to set fire to this entire map. It proposes a radical alternative called teleology. Now, teleology comes from the Greek word telos, which means an end, a goal, or a purpose. And this view argues that human behavior is never just a reaction to a past cause. It is always an action aimed at a future goal. We are not pushed by our past. Instead, we are pulled by our purpose. To see how this works, the book gives a powerful example of a young man who is painfully shy. He is in love with a woman, but is completely unable to confess his feelings. He is miserable, and he's crippled by anxiety whenever he thinks about approaching her. Now, the etiological view would diagnose him easily. He has social anxiety because he was rejected in the past, or because he had overbearing parents, or because he has a deep-seated feeling of inferiority. And the prescription would be to spend years in therapy, digging into his past to uncover the original cause of his fear. He is stuck until he can somehow fix his history. The teleological perspective asks a completely different question. It does not ask, why is he anxious? It asks, what is the goal of his anxiety? What purpose does this feeling serve for him right now? The answer is as brilliant as it is unsettling. The young man's goal is to avoid the possibility of being rejected by the woman he likes. He is terrified of hearing the word no. And to achieve this goal, his mind devises a clever strategy. If I never confess my feelings in the first place, then I can never be rejected. But this creates a conflict because he also genuinely desires her, so his mind needs an alibi, a justification for his inaction. And so, he subconsciously manufactures the feeling of anxiety. He creates the belief that he is socially awkward and incapable. This anxiety is not a mysterious affliction that befell him, but a tool he created to serve his purpose. And it allows him to tell himself, I desperately want to tell her how I feel, but sadly, I can't. This crippling anxiety is stopping me. It's not my fault. The symptom becomes his shield. The real problem is not his anxiety. The real problem is his profound lack of courage to face the tasks of life and relationships. He would rather live in the comfortable misery of his self-diagnosed condition than risk the sharp, but potentially liberating pain of rejection. Let's apply this to another one of the book's core examples. Imagine you are in a restaurant, and a waiter accidentally spills a cup of coffee on your favorite shirt. You leap to your feet and yell at him, your face red with rage. Why did you yell? The etiological explanation is simple. The coffee spill was the cause, and the anger was the effect. The shouting was the result of the anger. You were overcome by emotion and couldn't control yourself. But teleology argues this is a complete fabrication. It claims you did not shout because you were angry. You chose to become angry so that you could shout. Think about your goal in that moment. Your purpose was to make the waiter submit, to assert your dominance, and to make him understand the gravity of his mistake immediately. So, what is the most efficient tool for intimidating another human being into submission? A loud, explosive display of anger. So, in that split second, you grabbed the tool of anger from your emotional toolbox, and you used it to achieve your goal. The anger was not an uncontrollable force that happened to you. It was a calculated, albeit subconscious, instrument you used to get what you wanted. This shift in thinking changes everything. It moves you from being a passive victim of your life to being its active creator. It means that your emotions are not random weather patterns that blow through you, but tools that you are picking up and using to achieve your goals. This realization places all the power for change squarely in the present moment. You cannot go back in time to prevent your parents' divorce or erase a painful memory. The etiological view, therefore, is fundamentally pessimistic. But you can, at any moment, choose a new goal. You can decide that the goal of avoiding rejection at all costs is no longer serving you. And you can choose the new goal of living a courageous life. The moment you change your purpose, the emotions you need to create will change as well. And this is the definition of freedom. It is the understanding that we are not broken by what has happened to us. We are only limited by the purposes we continue to choose for ourselves, right here and right now. But if we are choosing our own unhappiness to achieve these goals, then what are these goals about, and where do they come from? The book's next claim is even more startling. Every single one of these goals, and therefore every one of our problems, is about other people. We have just dismantled a fundamental pillar of our personal stories. The idea that we are pushed by the past is gone. And in its place is the unsettling realization that we choose our own emotions and states of being to serve a present purpose. This naturally leads to the next question. If we are the ones choosing our own unhappiness, our anxiety, and our misery, then what is the grand purpose we are trying to achieve? The philosopher in the book delivers an answer that is somehow both obvious and earth-shattering. Every single problem, from the smallest private anxiety to the deepest existential dread, is an interpersonal relationship problem. At first, this statement seems preposterous, and it feels patently untrue. Surely, the anxiety I feel about my financial future is a private matter between me and my bank account. And surely, my struggle with my own body image is a personal battle fought inside my own head. And surely, my ambition to climb the corporate ladder is a reflection of my own individual drive. These struggles feel intensely personal, and they feel like they belong to us. Adlerian psychology, however, asks us to perform a simple but profound thought experiment to test this assumption. Imagine you are utterly and completely alone. Imagine you are the last living being in the entire universe. In this state of total solitude, would you still feel your specific anxieties? Think about your appearance. Would you worry about your weight? Or would you be bothered by a new wrinkle or a receding hairline if there was no one else there to see it? The entire concept of how I look would simply vanish. The feeling we call self-consciousness is not a consciousness of ourself, but a consciousness of how we imagine ourself appears to others. The problem is not your body. The problem is your relationship with the perceived judgment of other people. Now think about loneliness. This one is obvious. Loneliness is by its very definition a social wound, and it is the pain of feeling disconnected from others. But what about something like financial stress? The fear of not having enough money feels very real and very personal, but in a world without other people, money would just be a collection of useless paper and metal. Its value is a shared social agreement. Our anxiety about money is rarely about pure survival. It is about our ability to maintain a certain status within a social hierarchy. It is about the fear of falling behind our neighbors, or the pressure to provide for our families, who are other people. The number in your bank account is meaningless without a society that gives it meaning. This powerful test reveals a fundamental truth. We do not exist as isolated islands. We are born into a network of human connection, and we can never truly leave it. Our entire sense of self, and everything we think of as our personality, is forged in the fires of our relationships. So how do we truly understand who we are? Is it something we discover on our own? The book argues that it's impossible. We only begin to understand ourselves when we see ourselves through the eyes of other people. We figure out who we are by comparing ourselves to them. We define ourselves through our relationships with them. Our entire identity is shaped within the context of our community. And therefore, to solve our problems, we must understand the nature of the interpersonal games we are playing. The book explores this through its most important clinical concept, the inferiority complex. Adler believed that a simple feeling of inferiority is not only normal, but essential for human growth. It begins in childhood. As a small child, you are objectively weaker, slower, and less capable than the adults around you. And this creates a natural and healthy feeling of inferiority that drives you to grow. It fuels your desire to learn to walk, to talk, and to become as competent as the giants who care for you. This feeling continues throughout our lives. For instance, when you learn a new skill, you feel inferior to your teacher, and this feeling motivates you to practice. This drive for improvement is the engine of all human progress. However, an inferiority complex is something entirely different. It is a corruption of this healthy impulse. An inferiority complex arises when a person decides to use their feeling of inferiority not as a catalyst for growth, but as an excuse to avoid it. They take a real or imagined flaw and brandish it like a shield. And this is where the teleological perspective we discussed becomes critical. The person with an inferiority complex is using their perceived flaw to achieve a hidden goal. Consider the person who says, "I can't succeed in my career because I don't have a college degree." Or the person who says, "I'll never find a loving partner because I'm not physically attractive enough." From the outside, it looks like they are simply stating a sad fact about their life. But from a teleological perspective, they are making a declaration. They are saying, because of this unchangeable flaw, I am exempt from trying. And the hidden goal is to avoid the effort, and more importantly, to avoid the potential pain and humiliation of trying and failing. It is a profound problem of courage. It is easier to live in the gray twilight of if only than to step into the bright arena of life and risk being judged a failure by others. The complex provides a strange, bitter comfort, and it allows the person to preserve their pride by saying, "Of course I didn't succeed. How could I, with this disadvantage? But if I had that degree, I would have been a superstar." It is a fortress of excuses, built to protect a fragile ego from the battlefield of interpersonal relationships. The flip side of this coin is the superiority complex. The book makes it clear that this is not the opposite of an inferiority complex, but it is just another mask for it. The person who constantly boasts about their achievements, who name drops powerful friends, or who adorns themselves with luxury brands to signal their worth. This person is screaming their insecurity to the world. Their entire performance is for an audience, and they are desperately trying to convince others, and therefore themselves, that their deep-seated feeling of inferiority is not real. It is a life lived in reaction to the perceived judgment of others, a frantic dance to win approval and stave off irrelevance. It is, like its counterpart, purely an interpersonal relationship problem. Adler believed that all of these struggles play out across three major fronts, which he called the life tasks. These are the tasks of work, the tasks of friendship, and the tasks of love. The person using an inferiority complex to say "I'm not competent" is running away from the tasks of work. The person who says people are untrustworthy is avoiding the tasks of friendship. And the person who says "I am unlovable" is shrinking from the tasks of love. Ultimately, the book argues that escaping this trap has nothing to do with changing your external circumstances. It is not about getting a degree or becoming more attractive. It is about a fundamental shift in your internal world. It is about finding the courage to engage in the life tasks without a guarantee of a positive outcome. And it is about understanding that your worth as a human being is not measured by the approval you get from others. Your value is unconditional. But if our entire world of suffering is built upon our relationships with others, then how do we ever find freedom? How do we manage this fire without getting burned? The book offers a solution that is as breathtakingly simple as it is difficult to practice. It is a mental discipline. It calls the separation of tasks. We have arrived at a difficult but clarifying truth. Our deepest suffering, from our private anxieties to our most painful insecurities, is forged in the furnace of our interpersonal relationships. We are fundamentally social creatures, and our lives are an intricate web of connections, expectations, and judgments. And this leaves us standing before a critical dilemma. If this web is the source of our problems, then how do we find freedom? Must we become hermits, cutting ourselves off from the world to escape the tyranny of the crowd? Or is there a way to live within society, to engage with others, while still retaining our own autonomy and peace of mind? The book's answer is a resounding yes. Freedom is not found in physical isolation, but in mental clarification. It is achieved through a practice so simple in its description and so profound in its application that it can change the entire texture of your life. This practice is the centerpiece of Adlerian therapy, and it is the discipline known as the separation of tasks. This principle is a surgical tool for untangling the knots of our relationships. The rule is this: you must constantly ask yourself, whose task is this? You must learn to clearly distinguish your own tasks from the tasks of other people. And once you have made this distinction, you must commit to a simple vow: you will not interfere in other people's tasks, and you will not allow them to interfere in yours. At first this sounds abstract, but the book provides a brilliantly simple litmus test to make it concrete. To determine whose task something is, you simply ask, who will ultimately receive the final result of the choice being made? Whoever bears the unavoidable, long-term consequence of an action. That is the person whose task it is. Let's consider a basic example: the choice to study for an exam. Who ultimately receives the result of that choice? It will be the student. They will either pass or fail, and the grade belongs to them. Therefore, studying is the student's task. Now consider a parent's reaction to that student's grade, who ultimately owns the feeling of disappointment or pride. The parent, their emotional reaction is a product of their own expectations and thoughts, and it is their feeling. Therefore, their reaction is their task. The separation of tasks means the student focuses on studying, and the parent focuses on managing their own feelings. Where we get into trouble is when we interfere. Interference is the act of trying to control a task that is not our own. It is attempting to carry a burden that belongs to another. And this interference is often born from the best of intentions, which is what makes it so insidious. It masquerades as love, or care, or responsibility. But at its core, it is an act of control, driven by our own anxiety. And it is the root cause of resentment, conflict, and a life lived in service of others' expectations. The book provides a perfect, extended case study to illustrate this: the relationship between a parent and a child who will not do their homework. This is a battle fought in millions of homes every night. The parent, worried about the child's future, resorts to a campaign of nagging, threatening, bribing, and pleading. The child, feeling pressured and controlled, digs in their heels and resists. And the home, which should be a place of safety, becomes a tense battleground. The relationship frays. An Adlerian therapist would ask the parent to perform the separation of tasks. First, apply the litmus test. Whose task is it to study? Who will face the consequences of not doing homework? Who will fail the test, or fall behind in class, or have limited opportunities later in life? The inescapable answer is the child. Studying is fundamentally the child's task, and by constantly nagging and forcing the issue, the parent is desperately trying to take on the child's task. They are interfering. Now we must ask, from a teleological perspective, what is the goal of the parent's interference? The parent might say their goal is for the child's own good, but Adlerian psychology looks deeper. The parent's immediate goal is to alleviate their own anxiety. They're worried about what others will think of them as a parent, and they feel pressured by societal expectations. Their interference is a way to make themselves feel that they are in control and are being a good parent. They are, in effect, using the child to satisfy their own emotional needs. This interference, however well-intentioned, is profoundly damaging. First, it teaches the child a terrible lesson about responsibility. It communicates that the child is not responsible for their own life. It teaches them that someone else will always be there to worry for them, to push them, and to manage their problems. And this prevents them from developing self-discipline. Second, it communicates a deep and wounding lack of trust. The parent's actions are screaming, "I do not trust you. I do not believe you are capable of managing your own life. You will fail without my constant intervention." This erodes the child's self-confidence and fosters resentment. The correct Adlerian approach requires immense courage from the parent. The parent's true task is not to force the child to study. The parent's task is to love the child unconditionally. It is to build a foundation of trust. It is to create a safe environment and to make it known that help and support are always available. If and when the child decides to take on their task and asks for that help, the parent must have the courage to trust the child and to allow them to face the natural consequences of their own choices. And this is the only way for the child to learn to be a responsible and autonomous human being. This brings us to the core message encoded in the book's title. When we fail to separate tasks, we are living a life of servitude to the expectations of others. We become obsessed with our reputation and how we are perceived. We are desperate for recognition and approval. We choose a college major to please our parents, or we work late to get validation from our boss. We attend social events we hate to avoid disappointing our friends. And we live this way because we have mistakenly taken on their task, the task of how they feel about us. The price for seeking this approval is our freedom. In trying to live up to everyone's expectations, you are no longer living your own life. You are living a collection of other people's lives. The separation of tasks is the decision to stop. It is the realization that you have one life to live, yours. You focus on your tasks, choosing your career, doing your work, and speaking your truth. How other people feel about your choices is their task. It belongs to them. They have a right to any opinion they want, but you do not have to live by it. This is the courage to be disliked, and it is not about being aggressive or needlessly provocative. It is about having the courage to live an authentic life, aligned with your own values, without demanding that others approve of it. This principle is the ultimate tool for setting boundaries. It gives you permission to leave work at 5 p.m. Even if your boss seems annoyed, your task is to do your job effectively during your paid hours. And their task is to manage their own emotional response to your boundaries. It allows you to pursue a passion, even if your family thinks it's impractical. Your task is to build a life you find meaningful, and their task is to deal with their own opinions about your life. The separation of tasks is the sharp, clean cut that severs the puppet strings of expectation and approval. It is the practical, step-by-step method for reclaiming your psychological freedom. But this path can seem cold and lonely. If I truly stop caring what people think, am I destined to become a selfish, isolated individual? And does freedom mean cutting all ties? The philosopher in the book gives a resounding no. He argues that the separation of tasks is not the final destination. It is merely the entrance gate to a richer, more authentic way of connecting with humanity, a concept he calls community feeling. We have just walked through the stark and liberating logic of the separation of tasks. It is a powerful tool, a sharp blade that cuts the puppet strings of approval and allows us to stand on our own 2 feet. But as the strings fall away, a chilling question can arise. Where does this leave us? If I am to be so disciplined about whose task is whose, and develop the courage to be disliked, doesn't this path lead to a cold and lonely existence? Doesn't it place me at the center of my own universe, a sovereign of a kingdom of one? This is a natural and critical question, and the book's answer turns our assumptions completely upside down. The philosopher argues that the person who is most trapped, most miserable, and most obsessed with themselves is the one who constantly seeks the approval of others. Their every action is filtered through the question, how will they see me? They are the true center of their own universe, a universe in which they are perpetually on stage, performing for an audience. So the separation of tasks is not meant to build a higher throne for this self-centered monarch. It is meant to abdicate the throne entirely. It is the key that unlocks the prison of the self, allowing us to finally turn our attention outward. And this is the journey from a life of self-interest to a life of social interest. It is the path to what Adler considered the ultimate goal of all personal development. Community feeling. Community feeling, or kyodotai, kankaku in Japanese, is the bedrock of Adlerian happiness. It is not simply a fleeting emotion, but a deep and abiding awareness that you are part of an interconnected whole. It is the unshakable sense of belonging and the feeling of being at home in the universe. To develop this feeling, we must first radically expand our definition of community. The book explains that this community does not just include your family, your friends, and your immediate co-workers. It extends outward in both space and time. It encompasses your city, your nation, and all of humanity. It includes generations past who brought us to this point, and generations future who will inherit the world we build. But it goes even further. The Adlerian community includes animals, plants, and even inanimate objects. It is a sense of connection to all of existence. Now, this may sound mystical, but its psychological purpose is concrete. It shifts our perspective from that of an isolated individual competing for scarce resources, to that of a vital component in a vast, cooperative network. When you live without community feeling, other people are threats. They are rivals in the workplace, or competitors for social status, or an audience whose judgment you fear. Life is a vertical hierarchy, and your goal is to climb higher than others. But when you live with community feeling, this entire framework collapses. Other people become your comrades. They are fellow travelers on a horizontal plane. They are not your competition. They are your partners. And this shift from a world of enemies to a world of comrades changes the entire flavor of your existence. The question is no longer, what can I get from others? But what can I give? The book explains that developing this profound sense of connection rests on practicing 3 interconnected pillars: self-acceptance, confidence in others, and contribution to others. The first pillar is self-acceptance, and this is perhaps the most misunderstood concept in self-help. Self-acceptance is not the same as conditional self-esteem, which is feeling good about yourself only when you succeed, nor is it the same as self-affirmation, which can often be a form of lying to yourself, like chanting "I am perfect" in the mirror, when you know you are not. Self-acceptance is the courageous and dispassionate act of acknowledging the facts of your existence. The book uses a simple metaphor. If you take a test and score a 60 out of 100, self-acceptance is simply accepting, my current score is a 60. You don't have to like it, and you don't have to be happy about it. You certainly don't tell yourself, this 60 is actually a 100. You just accept the reality of the 60 as your starting point. And why? Because you cannot change anything from a place of delusion. Only by calmly accepting your starting point can you begin to formulate a plan to get to a 65 and then a 70. Self-acceptance means separating what you can change from what you cannot. You might have been born a certain height or with a specific chronic illness. These are unchangeable givens, and you accept them. But your knowledge, your skills, your fitness, and your relationships, these are changeable. You accept your current state and then have the courage to focus your energy on improving what is within your power. It is the end of making excuses and the beginning of honest work. The second pillar is confidence in others, which the book defines as unconditional trust. This is perhaps the most challenging pillar, and it is only possible after you have mastered the separation of tasks. If you have not separated tasks, you cannot possibly trust others unconditionally. Their potential betrayal feels like a direct attack on you, because you are making their behavior your problem. But once you have separated tasks, you understand that whether someone is trustworthy or not is their task, not yours. Your task is simply to decide whether you will live from a place of trust or a place of doubt. Adler argues you must choose to trust. This is a unilateral, baseline decision that is not based on evidence. You simply decide that the world is a friendly place and that people are your comrades. And why? Think of the alternative. To live in doubt is to spend your life as a detective, constantly searching for clues that people might betray you. It is exhausting, and it poisons every interaction with suspicion. It guarantees you will live in a world of potential enemies. To live in trust, on the other hand, allows you to build genuine connections. Of course, some people may betray that trust, but this does not mean you are a fool. It simply means you have gained new information, and you then use that information to adjust your relationship with that specific person. But you do not let their failure at their task change your fundamental posture toward the world. You continue to trust because living in a world of comrades is the only way to experience community feeling. This leads us to the third and most important pillar, contribution to others. And this is the very heart of Adlerian happiness. For Adler, happiness is not something you get. It is not a reward for achievement. Happiness is the subjective feeling that I am useful to someone. It is the feeling of contribution. Now, the most critical part of this concept is that the contribution does not need to be recognized, praised, or even noticed by anyone else. Its value is entirely in the internal, personal feeling of having been of use. The moment you feel you have contributed, you experience a sense of your own worth. For example, if you pick up a piece of trash in a park, you have contributed to the community. No one may have seen you, and you will not get a reward. But you can walk away with the quiet satisfaction of knowing you were useful. That feeling, right there, is happiness. This reframes our entire life's work. Contribution can be found everywhere. Doing your job conscientiously is a contribution to your company and to society. And washing the dishes after a family meal is a contribution to your family. The book gives the poignant example of an elderly, bedridden grandparent. They cannot perform great deeds, and they cannot work or provide financially. But by simply maintaining a cheerful attitude, by not being a burden of negativity, and by being a source of warmth and love to their family, they are making a profound contribution. Their very existence is a source of joy for others, and in that they can feel their own immense worth. And this proves that our value does not lie in our external achievements, but in our intention to be useful to our community. The journey to happiness, then, is a journey away from the self. The separation of tasks frees you from the need for external approval, and this freedom is not an end in itself. It is the prerequisite that allows you to then engage with the world authentically through the three pillars. You accept yourself, you trust others, and you seek to contribute. This is the path to community feeling. And this is the Adlerian definition of a good and happy life. But what does this life look like in motion? If life is not a vertical climb for status, then what is it? The book's final beautiful answer reframes our entire concept of time and meaning. It teaches us that life is not a line, but a dance. We have traveled from the depths of our personal past to the heart of our connections with others. We have found the tools to achieve freedom through the separation of tasks, and a purpose for that freedom in community feeling. We now understand a happy life is a life of contribution and how to build it through the pillars of self-acceptance and trust. But this leaves us with the most practical question of all. How does one live this way, day by day and moment by moment? We have been taught since birth to see life as a story, a race, or a linear path from a starting line to a finish line. We see our lives as a climb toward a distant peak. The book's final, and perhaps most liberating lesson, is that this entire model of living is a trap. It asks us to shatter this timeline and discover the infinite power and perfection of the present moment. It is the shift from a life of striving to a life of dancing. And it is learning to live not like a traveler racing to a destination, but like a star, shining with all its energy in the eternal here and now. To grasp this, we must first dissect the prison of the linear life, a mindset I call destination sickness. This is the belief that the value of your present is justified only by the future it will create. Life becomes a series of means to an end. The high school student endures 4 years of classes he finds boring in order to get into a good college. The college student pulls all-nighters studying subjects she doesn't love in order to get a degree that will lead to a good job. And the employee grinds through a soul-crushing 40-hour workweek, telling himself it is all in order to have a comfortable retirement in 30 years. We live our lives in a perpetual state of in order to. We are constantly postponing living. We tell ourselves that I will be happy when I get the promotion, when I lose 20 pounds, when I pay off my mortgage, or when I finally go on that vacation. Happiness is always a destination, a future point on a map, and never the ground beneath our feet. This way of living is not only unfulfilling, it is profoundly dangerous. First, it systematically devalues the vast majority of your existence. Your life is not the single moment of graduation or retirement. Your life is the thousands of days of studying and working. And if all those days are viewed as nothing more than a tiresome commute to a future paradise, then you have effectively rendered most of your life as meaningless. You are treating your own precious time as something to be endured, not lived. Second, this model is incredibly fragile. What happens if you never reach the destination? Maybe you get sick, or the economy crashes and you lose your job. The plan simply fails. If the entire meaning of your journey was tied to that one single outcome, your life story instantly becomes a tragedy. It becomes a narrative of failure, and all that sacrifice was for nothing. Finally, the greatest tragedy of destination sickness is that the destination itself is often a mirage. Even for those who achieve their goals, the promised happiness is fleeting. You get the dream job, and within months, it has become just a job. You reach your goal weight, and soon you are worrying about something else. The finish line, once crossed, immediately disappears, and a new, more distant one materializes. The real life you were waiting for never actually begins. Adlerian psychology proposes a radical and beautiful alternative. It asks us to see life not as a line, but as a series of dots, a series of moments. It wants us to practice an energetic view of life. And this means that each moment, each dot, is complete and perfect in itself. It is not a means to an end, it is the end. The past has no power to define this dot, and the future is not its justification. The only thing that is real, and the only thing you have any power over, is this single moment, right here, right now. The book's most powerful analogy for this way of living is the dance. Think of a person who is truly absorbed in a dance. Their goal is not to get to the other side of the room. Their purpose is fulfilled in every single step, every leap, and every spin. Each movement is a destination in itself. The entire point of the dance is the act of dancing, moment by moment. And if the music were to stop unexpectedly in the middle of the performance, would the dance be considered a failure? Of course not. It was already a complete and fulfilling experience in every moment it was happening. Now, contrast this with a person whose only goal is to walk across the room to get a drink. Their journey is a line. And if they are stopped halfway, their journey is a failure. They did not achieve their purpose. The dancer's journey is the destination. The walker's journey is just a means. We must learn to live our lives like a dance. Now, this does not mean we should be aimless. It is good to have goals. You might decide you want to become a doctor, or climb a mountain. But you do not live for the moment you get your medical license, or for the moment you stand on the summit. You focus on the dance of today. If you are a pre-med student, you find purpose and engagement in the act of learning about biology today. The fascination with the Krebs cycle is the point. The discussion with your study group is the point. You live the dance of being a student so fully that if you were to change your mind later, none of that time would have been wasted. Or if you were a mountain climber, you don't focus only on the peak. You find fulfillment in the physical challenge of each step, the beauty of the view at every altitude, and the camaraderie around the campfire each night. If a sudden storm forces you to turn back before reaching the summit, the journey was not a failure. It was a rich and complete experience, a dance that was fulfilling in every moment. This is the power of living in the here and now. You concentrate all of your life's energy into this present moment, like a spotlight, and shine as brightly as you can. You do the task in front of you, washing a dish, writing an email, or listening to a friend with your full attention and dedication. This philosophy redefines what a meaningful life is. You do not need a dramatic story, and you do not need a heroic climax. A so-called normal day, lived with presence, awareness, and a feeling of contribution, is a perfect and complete life. Meaning is not found at the end of the story, but is woven into the very texture of our daily moment-to-moment existence. This does not mean we wander without direction. The book suggests we should always have a guiding star before us, and that star is the abstract and limitless goal of contribution to others and community feeling. This star is not a destination you can arrive at. You can never be finished contributing. It simply provides a direction for your dance. So you dance in the general direction of that star. But your focus is always on the quality, energy, and conscientiousness of your steps right now. And so, we arrive at the end of our deep dive. We began by learning to sever the chains of the past. Understanding that we are not defined by causes but are pulled by purpose. We discovered that all our troubles are born from our relationships. And that freedom lies in having the courage to separate tasks and be disliked. We found that the harbor of true happiness is not in getting, but in giving. And finally, we have learned that this entire courageous way of being is practiced by rejecting the race to the future and embracing the dance of the here and now. The power to change your life is not in your history or your destination. The power has been in your hands all along. The question is not when your real life will finally begin. The only question is what you will do with this moment. The only moment you will ever truly have.